Ethan's palms were sweating. The exam paper in front of him might as well have been written in another language. He gripped his pen, stared at the questions, and felt his chest tighten. First page, blank. Second page, blank. By the time the supervisor called out, 5 minutes left, he still hadn't written a single complete answer. When the bell rang, chairs scraped against the floor and students rushed out, Ethan just sat there, staring at the mess of unanswered questions, humiliation rising in his throat. He could already imagine his father's voice. You had every privilege, every tutor, every resource, and yet this? Dragging himself out of the exam hall, he kept his head down. The hallways of Westbridge Academy smelled faintly of bleach. That smell had always meant failure to Ethan, because every time he stayed behind after school, too ashamed to go home, that same smell lingered in the background. Rough day? A voice asked softly. Ethan froze. It was Miss Harris, the janitor. Tall, broad-shouldered, her dark skin shining with a sheen of sweat, she pushed her mop across the polished floor. Silver streaks ran through her tightly curled hair, and her eyes, steady, calm, seemed to see straight through Ethan. Don't worry about it, Ethan muttered, trying to brush past, but Miss Harris stopped him with a gentle smile. You look like a boy carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't want to cry, not in front of the janitor. His father would kill him if he knew Ethan was confiding in staff. The billionaire Robert Caldwell had raised his son to think janitors were invisible. Still, something in Miss Harris's voice, warm, unhurried, broke through the wall Ethan had built. He dropped his bag on the floor and whispered, I failed again. Miss Harris leaned on her mop. Again? Every single test, math, history, even literature. My tutors think I'm lazy, my dad thinks I'm stupid, and maybe I am. For a moment, silence filled the corridor, broken only by the squeak of the mop bucket's wheels. Then Miss Harris said quietly, You're not stupid. You're searching. Ethan frowned. Searching? She nodded. Some people learn facts. Others learn patterns. And a few, like you, need to learn meaning. If nobody teaches you how to connect with what you're learning, you'll always feel like you're drowning. Ethan blinked, confused. Meaning? What does that even... Come, Miss Harris motioned toward the empty classroom. I'll show you. That afternoon, Ethan found himself sitting across from her at a small desk. Miss Harris took Ethan's exam paper and tapped one question with her calloused finger. Here, she said, this isn't about remembering names and dates. It's about people. Imagine you were there. How would you feel? What choice would you make? Ethan frowned, reread the question. Something shifted. Instead of seeing it as lifeless text, he pictured the moment. A king forced to choose between war and peace, men waiting on his word. Suddenly, the answer didn't feel like memorization. It felt like stepping into someone else's shoes. He started writing. Words tumbled out. Miss Harris smiled. See? You don't need more tutors. You need to see yourself in what you're learning. Ethan's pulse quickened. For the first time, studying didn't feel like torture. Over the next weeks, Ethan sought Miss Harris every afternoon. They'd sit in the back of the classroom or the quiet library corner while she showed him tricks no tutor had ever taught. Don't just read, visualize. Make the story play out in your head. When you hit a math problem, ask yourself, what's the story behind these numbers? If you can teach me the lesson in your own words, you've mastered it. Ethan discovered he wasn't broken. He simply learned differently. And Miss Harris, with her patience and grit, became the first teacher who saw him not as a billionaire's son, but as a boy desperate to be understood. But life at home didn't change. One night, Ethan sat at the dinner table across from his father. The chandelier above them gleamed. The table stretched long and cold.
Robert Coldwell cut his steak with precision, his voice sharp. "I got the results from your last exams. Abysmal, as usual. Do you understand how this embarrasses me? Do you know what the board thinks when my son, my heir, can't even pass high school tests?" Ethan's fork clattered against the plate. "I'm trying, Dad." "Trying is for losers. Results are what matter." The words stung. Ethan clenched his fists under the table, but for the first time, he didn't feel crushed. Miss Harris's steady voice echoed in his mind. "You're not stupid. You're searching." Ethan looked up at his father and said quietly, "Maybe results aren't everything." His father's knife froze mid-cut. "Excuse me?" "Nothing," Ethan muttered quickly, but inside, a seed of defiance had been planted. The midterms arrived in spring. By now, Ethan had a ritual. Deep breaths, eyes closed, stepping into the story. He didn't ace every subject, but when the final grades were announced, Ethan had done the impossible. He'd ranked in the top 20% of his class. The school auditorium buzzed as awards were handed out, and when Ethan's name was called for Most Improved Student, the applause felt deafening. For the first time, he wasn't the billionaire's son defined by failure. He was just Ethan, finally proud of himself. As he stepped off the stage, clutching his certificate, Ethan spotted Miss Harris in the back, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, eyes shining with quiet pride. Ethan made his way over. "This is yours," he whispered, holding out the certificate. Miss Harris shook her head. "No, son, that's all you." "But you taught me the secret." Her smile deepened. "And what's that secret?" Ethan took a shaky breath, repeating the words that had changed his life. "You're not stupid. You're searching." Years later, when Ethan stood on the stage of his university graduation, not just graduating, but as valedictorian, he spotted his father in the crowd, stiff and unreadable. But beside him, quietly clapping with the same patient smile, was Miss Harris. He began his speech with a line no one expected. "I once failed every test. Everyone thought I was hopeless. But one woman, a janitor, taught me a secret that changed everything. We're not defined by failure. We're defined by the meaning we find in the struggle." The auditorium went silent. His father lowered his eyes, but Miss Harris's clapping grew louder. And in that moment, Ethan knew he had finally passed the only test that ever mattered.